You're watching Alaska Public Media. Life informed. Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of AKwx, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Taking a look now, we have quite a few warnings out for the state, so we'll start with those. Pretty impactful. In the south, we're seeing primarily advisories, so let's start for the southern track with these advisories. Along the Kuskokwim Delta area, seeing an advisory for blowing snow conditions, and that starts 6 a.m. tomorrow morning and goes until 6 p.m. tomorrow night. Then we have two advisories here. The northern one is for snow. The southern one is for snow and blowing snow. Both of these start at noon tomorrow, and they will both go until 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. Moving off further to the east, in the corridor from that Cook Inlet area up into the Susitna Valley, all of these are out for snow. There's one for the Anchorage area, one for the Matt Valley, and then one for the Susitna Valley. Now, primarily, the snow is going to impact the higher elevations, so the Talkeetna Mountains down into the hillside in the Anchorage area. And those are all going to be out starting at 6 p.m. The warning is going to go out until 5 p.m. on Saturday, 6 p.m. on Friday, out until 5 p.m. on Saturday, and then the two advisories will be out from 6 p.m. on Friday until noon on Saturday. Then we have another advisory for the Copper River Basin, and that one is going to start midnight Friday night and go until 5 p.m. on Saturday. Again, that is for snow. So a lot of snow out east and then some blowing snow conditions as we get further off to the west there. And we'll move north and check out all the warnings that we have out along the western coast of the state. Now, all of these are winter storm warnings for snow and blowing snow. They go anywhere from St. Lawrence Island to the Yukon Delta and Valley, and then up along the Nulato Hills into the Ambler area and other places along the southwestern part of the Brooks Range. Shishmaref will be spared, however. And then we have those going out from various times. So the earliest ones are out by St. Lawrence Island starting around 3 a.m. Other start times start to get later as we get further to the east and north. So 6 a.m., 9 a.m., noon, and then up to as late as a 3 p.m. start time as we get closer towards Ambler and other places in the southwestern Brooks Range. The end times are going to stagger like that as well. The earliest end times out for the Gamble area, 3 p.m. on Saturday, and then 3 p.m. on Friday, rather, and then we have going out until as late as 6 p.m. as we get out into the Ambler area. So again, check our website for additional details on any of those if you're in any of those locations. Now we'll take a look at what is impacting and causing all of those conditions. So we have low pressure way off to the northwestern part of the state starting to push in over the northern part of the state, and you can see the troughing coming in behind that system. Pretty weak right now, but that's not causing any of those impacts, but what we are seeing is a lot of snow due to that, and as we move off a little bit further to the east, we can watch this again starting to push through the southwestern part of the state, and that's going to move over the south central and eastern parts of the interior as we get further off into the nighttime hours tonight. We can watch this one more time out in the Gulf. There are several low pressure systems that we can see spinning out there, bringing up a lot of warmer air and some rain to the southeast. But as you can see, that's starting to diminish already. So we're going to see some lingering showers with that. And then way out to the west, our main low pressure system that's going to bring in all those warning level conditions, that's coming in here. And we can see that starting to push out over into the Bering Sea, the front associated with that dropping down. And now we'll look at where we have that right now for the remainder of today. Way out west, that tighter gradient bringing in some stronger winds, but just a rain and snow mix right now for the western and central Aleutian Islands. Some ridging out ahead of that, that's bringing in some fog to the Bristol Bay area, up the western coast of the state into around the Nunavik Island area. Then we're going to start to see some precipitation with a rain and snow mixture there, becoming more snow as we get into the Yukon Delta, and some areas of snow up along the Seward Peninsula and into the Kotzebue Sound area, mixing in with some fog up there, and then snow up through the Arctic coastline. And we can see that trough bringing in snow throughout much of the interior, all throughout that western corridor down to Lake Iliamna, and then out into the central parts of the interior and the Alaska Range, and places throughout the Brooks Range as well, continuing to progress slowly eastward as we move out through the remainder of this afternoon and evening. Then the lows out in the Gulf right now quickly diminishing, but we do have some rain producing from those in the Kenai Peninsula area, up into places around Cook Inlet with some fog developing there as well, and then some rain for Kodiak Island. Yakutat and down into the southeast, still seeing rain for now, diminishing, but that should last as we move even into the nighttime hours here. We are expecting that rain to continue. Going to get a little bit colder there by Skagway. Going to see some snow mixing in with that. And then some rain continuing into the Prince William Sound area. Colder for the Kenai Peninsula, switching over to snow as we move into the evening hours. And rain and snow mix for Kodiak Island down there. And that weak low now over the nighttime hours pushing off to the northeastern part of the state, continuing to bring snow throughout all of the interior, up through the Brooks Range along the Arctic coast. And through the interior, you're going to see some fog mixed in with that all the way out to the western part of the state, where we will see that continuing down into the Yukon Delta area, transitioning over to just be snow as we get further to the south. And this system is going to continue to push and bring in that snow into places along the west coast overnight. And we have that becoming warmer after that warm front, switching over to rain for the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. That takes us into Friday, where we have our front now pushing into the western part of the state, where we have a lot of those snow and blowing snow conditions. We can see all the way along the west coast going up into that southwestern part of the Brooks Range and areas throughout into the YK Delta, the lower Kuskokwim Valley, lower Yukon Valley as well, but getting a little bit colder or warmer as we get along the Bristol Bay area, transitioning over to rain there with some rain still in the central Aleutian Islands and some isolated rain and snow showers out behind that frontal system. But as we look up along ahead of the system, we just have some snow up along the Arctic coastline, mixing with fog as we get down into the Brooks Range, just some isolated areas of snow and fog going down into the central and eastern parts of the interior. South Central will dry out for portions of Friday, but as we get further off to the east towards Cordova, going to see some rain out there, and then rain along the North Gulf Coast into the Panhandle area. Lighter as we get further to the south, that high pressure starting to diminish some of those showers there, but with the stratus underneath that fog, we will see a few sprinkles out of that in the southern parts of the Panhandle on Friday. As we move into Saturday, going to see a continued lighter rain in the southern part, a little bit more persistent as we get further to the north through Yakutat as well, and then it's getting colder as we get into the south central area. Going to see a rain and snow mix for the Kenai Peninsula extending into the Prince William Sound area, when starting to see snow as we get further to the north, and some areas of blowing snow as we get into southern parts of the interior. Not enough for advisory conditions for Saturday there, but we will have snow widespread throughout the remainder of the interior as well, going up along the Arctic coastline. And then that low that has been giving us all the problems, still continuing to provide blowing snow conditions throughout St. Lawrence Island area, Seward Peninsula up to the southwestern Brooks Range, places down in the upper Yukon or YK Delta areas, and then snow further to the south, starting to diminish now as we get down into the Bristol Bay area, and then warm enough to see some rain showers out through the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutian Islands. But we have high pressure coming in from the west, starting to clear out the Bering Sea and western parts of the Aleutians. Taking a look now at our temperatures as of this afternoon at 2 p.m. down in the Panhandle area, right around 40 degrees, getting a little bit warmer as we get further to the south and along the Gulf Coast. And then we have 39 degrees there, a little bit colder for Juneau, 42 for Haines, 42 for Yakutat as well. Moving out into the south central, warmest temperatures are along the Gulf coastline. Cordova, Middleton Island, Homer all at 43 degrees. In the mid-30s throughout many of the locations, more interior locations of the south central, down to as low as 32 at Glen Allen, 39 for Valdez, 37 for Talkeetna. Warmer for Kodiak, seeing 44 degrees this afternoon. Then into the interior part of the state, southern parts of the interior in the mid-30s there. Fairbanks 31 degrees, and then as we get further to the north, dropping down to the 20s and eventually down to the teens and single digits. 10 degrees through the pass, 5 degrees for Arctic Village. Bettles at 20 degrees this afternoon, and then all along the Arctic coastline below zero there. As we get into the Kotzebue Sound area, a little bit warmer into the single digits, with 10 cities staying a little bit colder, -7 degrees there. Down into the Norton Sound area in the 20s for the most part, Nome at 20 degrees. And down for the rest of the YK Delta area, seeing temperatures in the mid-20s to right around 30 degrees. Bethel, the coldest there, 26 degrees. Antioch at 30 degrees. Then getting up into the mid-30s as we get down into the Bristol Bay area. King Salmon a little bit colder there, 31 degrees, but then rising up into the upper 30s as we get down towards Cold Bay at 39, Sandpoint 39 as well. Dutch Harbor 39 degrees. And moving off into the Central Aleutian Islands, staying pretty similar, and then 41 for Shemya, 36 for St. Paul, and 35 for St. George. Taking a look at our lows for tonight, not dropping a whole lot out here into the mid-30s out for the Western Aleutian Islands, right around 40 degrees, staying pretty much the same for the Central Aleutian Islands. Then down into the mid to lower 30s in the Panhandle, or the Alaska Peninsula, and down into the mid-20s for the Bristol Bay area, lower 20s for the YK Delta, single digits as we get up into the Seward Peninsula area, and below zero for the Kotzebue Sound area, with Kotzebue getting down to -6, and Kivalina down to -2 there. Down into the negative teens along the Arctic coastline, with Barrow down to -11. Staying a little bit warmer there at Kaktovik. -6 degrees expected low for tonight. Single digits as we get down into the northern parts of the interior, but getting up into the mid-teens, up into around 20 degrees as we get into the southern part of the interior, and then up around 30 degrees for the south central, mid-30s as we get along the Gulf coastline, and mid-30s to upper 30s as we get into the Panhandle, with Ketchikan getting up, or staying up to around 39 degrees. Highs for tomorrow getting up to 40s to mid-40s for the southeast. For the south central, seeing temperatures in the mid-30s as well. Mid-20s to mid-30s for much of the interior. Still colder up to the north. 20 degrees for Bettles, 10 through the pass, and then staying below zero all along the Arctic coastline except for Kaktovik, getting up to 0 degrees for tomorrow. Down the western coast of the state, mid-20s, getting up to the mid-30s as we get down into the YK Delta area. Getting up to around 40 degrees in Bristol Bay, in the mid-40s throughout the Aleutians, with the exception of the western Aleutians with that colder air coming in behind the front, only getting up to around 36 degrees for a high for Shemya tomorrow. Taking a look now at our aviation forecast. With that system moving through, we do have a lot of MVFR conditions pushing into the state. These will progress further to the east as the day moves on, these IFR conditions as well. With those blowing snow conditions developing, going to see a lot of those IFR conditions with that. And then out over the eastern part of the state, starting off MVFR, but some of that is going to push off to the east, but a lot of that will be replaced with more MVFR conditions as that system pushes off to the east as well. Taking a look through the passes, Anaktuvik will start off MVFR, will improve slightly throughout the afternoon, but then drop back down to MVFR in the evening hours. Same with Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill will both start off VFR, drop all the way down to IFR as that frontal system approaches. Rainy Pass will similarly start off VFR, drop down to IFR. Windy will start MVFR and drop down to IFR for tomorrow. Isabel should be MVFR throughout the day, as well as Mentasta Pass and Tanita Pass, all going to be marginal. Portage should be marginal as well. Chilkoot and White will both start off MVFR and then improve to VFR for tomorrow. Taking a look at our freezing levels, there's some of that warmer air intruding into places around the Panhandle, bringing us some of that rain out there. But the big story is out west, with a lot of that warmer air being brought up by that warm front approaching. But we can notice that our freezing line is still off of the southwest coast, which is going to allow for a lot of those snowy conditions to develop all throughout those areas into the western part of the state. For our icing tomorrow, as expected with that frontal system approaching, we have a lot along the west coast, a lower as we get further to the North Kotzebue Sound area between 3,000 and 7,000 feet there, and gradually rising as we get into the Bristol Bay area where we have above 10,000 feet there. And then way off to the east, we have an area from the south central down to around the Cordova area, extending out over the eastern part of the state between 6,000 and 10,000 feet there. Jet stream for tomorrow will start off west with the bulk of the jet coming in from a westerly direction out over the Bering Sea up to as high as 155 knots, but dropping down pretty quickly out over the interior part of the state down to 85 knots there, and then going out of that southwesterly direction out of a westerly direction now at 110 knots out over northern Canada. Another part of that jet, 105 knots, going right by the Aleutian Islands, dropping down to the south at 125 knots and coming back up around that low pressure system at around 95 knots, going over the Panhandle, exiting out about 100 knots to the east. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, as we saw on the jet stream level, we do have our strongest winds out over the Bering Sea, similarly at 9,000 feet, but only getting up to around 70 knots here, still pretty strong at this level. And then that's only going to drop down to around 65 knots out over the Aleutian Islands. But as we move out over mainland Alaska, that southwesterly flow, weakest as we get further to the north, 15 knots there, getting up to as high as 30 knots over that core part of the state, and then dropping down as we get out over the Gulf, 10 to 15 knots there, but picking back up to around 30 out over the southeast. Down to 3,000 feet now, still pretty weak out over the southeastern part of the state, 10 to 15 knots there, picking up as we get over that main corridor, southwesterly flow, 30 knots, picking up to 40 knots as we exit out over the northeastern part of the state, but dropping back down again to around 20 knots out over the Arctic coastline. Then with our main low, we do have our strongest winds remaining on the southerly side at 3,000 feet up to as high as 60 knots there of that westerly direction, dropping down to only around 50 knots as we get out over the Aleutians, still pretty strong there. And as you can expect with those stronger winds, quite a bit of turbulence associated with that low. So below 4,000 feet as we go out to the western Aleutian Islands, picking up to be below 6,000 feet as we get out over the south central area. And we are expecting this to gradually shift off to the east and north as those conditions, or as that frontal system continues to push into the main part of the state. And then a little area of light turbulence right over the northeastern coastline there below 4,000 feet. We'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Green caterpillars again?
Welcome to Stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer from the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. It's not easy being green, particularly if you're a caterpillar. So, with St. Patrick's Day just around the corner, we thought we'd share one of our favorite ways to remember the order of Jupiter's 4 largest moons.
That's right, James. Jupiter is in a great spot for viewing right now. So, get your telescopes ready and let's go eat some green caterpillar. Jupiter is the largest planet in our solar system, and it's the 5th one from the Sun, with our Earth being number 3. Earth is on average 93 million miles away from the Sun, whereas Jupiter's average distance is 484 million miles. But because Jupiter is a much slower moving planet than our Earth, Jupiter and Earth constantly vary their distance from each other.
When Jupiter is at its farthest distance from us and is on the other side of the Sun as seen from Earth, it can be as far as 593 million miles away. However, once each year, Earth and Jupiter line up on the same side of the Sun and are many millions of miles closer to each other. Whenever this happens, we say Jupiter is at opposition because Jupiter is opposite the Sun in the sky as seen from Earth.
When Jupiter is near opposition, it's great for viewing because it's at its closest and brightest. Jupiter was at opposition back on February 2nd, 2015, and was only 4.3 astronomical units away. And although it's over 15 million miles farther away this week, at 4.5 astronomical units, it is still great for viewing, even in a small telescope. Here's where I Eat Green Caterpillars comes in. Okay, We've got our skies set up for about an hour after sunset any night this week facing east. About halfway up in the sky, one of the brightest objects you'll see will be Jupiter.
Jupiter will be near the backwards question mark shape of stars that mark the head of Leo the Lion. You can find Leo by using the stars in the bowl of the Big Dipper. Take the two stars opposite the pointer stars and draw a line southward, and you'll run smack dab into the stars of Leo the Lion.
Jupiter is by far the easiest planet to see through even the smallest telescope. In fact, if the air is still, you can see Jupiter's cloud bands, and if the timing is right, you can see the famous Great Red Spot, a giant storm system larger than 3 Earths lined up side by side.
As you look through your telescope, you'll also notice something that attracted the attention of Galileo, the first person who ever looked at Jupiter through a telescope. He saw 4 tiny pinpoints of light which seemed to extend out from Jupiter's equator. If you observe Jupiter each night, you'll notice that these 4 lights constantly change their position from night to night. Sometimes you'll see 2 lined up on one side and 2 on the other. Sometimes you'll see 3 and 1, sometimes 4 lined up on one side, and so on. These are Jupiter's 4 largest moons, and they're called the Galilean satellites because they were first discovered by Galileo in 1610.
Now, although Jupiter, as of today, is known to have 67 moons, these 4 moons are the biggies. And in fact, all but one of these 4 is larger than our moon. Their names, in order outward from Jupiter, are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Each of these moons has unique characteristics. For example, Io has volcanoes that erupt molten sulfur, and Europa has a liquid ocean of water beneath an icy crust.
Ganymede is the largest moon in the solar system, and it's even larger than the planet Mercury. And Callisto is one of the most heavily cratered of all the large moons in our solar system. Surprisingly, some people have a difficult time remembering their correct order. But a while back, Jack Horkheimer shared how he remembered them.
Jack decided to take the first letter of each moon's name and think of a catchy phrase that he would never forget. He came up with I for Io,
Eat for Europa,
green for Ganymede,
and caterpillars for Callisto.
Doing that, we've never forgotten their correct order since.
So just remember, I eat green caterpillars and impress your friends.
It's easy to do if you keep looking up.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a look at the ice edge. We do still have some ice in the Cook Inlet area down to about Calgon Island there. As we look off further to the west, the big story here is that this ice is decreasing for the next couple days, but as we get into early next week, we're expecting some colder temperatures to come back, so we are expecting the ice to start to recover and start to grow back out. Further to the south, the sea surface temperatures in a lot of those locations are pretty prime for that ice to grow again, so we are looking at early next week the ice edge to start to grow back to the south there. Then for the remainder of the Marines, starting off in the southeastern part of the state, pretty weak flow, 10 to 15 knots throughout all the areas here, with seas only getting up to as high as 6 feet on Friday. But then as we move into Saturday, picking up to around 20 knots most locations out of a south-southeasterly direction for the most part, seas getting up to as high as 7 feet out in the eastern parts of the Gulf. For the south central, we do have winds out of a southwesterly direction, anywhere from 15 to 25 knots weakest as we get off to the east, with seas only getting up to around 5 feet in height. Then on Saturday, things picking up here, getting up to as high as 30 knots out of a more westerly direction now, becoming northerly as we get further off to the east. Into the Prince William Sound area, only around 20 knots there, and seas up to as high as 8 feet now for the western parts of the Gulf, but in the southern parts of Cook Inlet up to as high as 10 feet with that southwesterly flow. Along the Alaska Peninsula, southwesterly becoming more southerly as we get further to the north there. 25 to 35 knots, strongest out to the west, closer to that frontal system, and seas up to as high as 11 feet, again closest to that frontal system approaching from the west. Then on Saturday, as the front passes, we are seeing more westerly flow becoming more northwesterly, strongest in the Bering side, 30 knots there, with seas up to as high as 12 feet, down around 7 feet as we get further off to the east. Then on Friday for the Aleutian Islands, westerly flow becoming more southwesterly, around 30 knots for the most part, a little bit stronger for the western Aleutian Islands, up to as high as 40 knots there. Seas out west up to as high as 16 feet, and then dropping down only to around 11 to 13 feet as we get further off to the east. On Saturday, flow switching, becoming more northwesterly, dropping down to as low as 15 knots, but for the most part staying around 25 to 30 knots out of that northwesterly direction. And then out of a northerly direction as we push off further to the west towards Shimia there, at around 20 knots. On the west coast of the state, we have flow primarily out of a southerly direction, 35 to 40 knots, becoming more easterly as we get closer to the Bering Strait, and then some freezing spray way out west, west of St. Matthew Island there, with our strongest seas out there as well, up to as high as 18 feet, pretty low to the south of Nunavik Island, only around 9 feet there. Then on Saturday, westerly flow for the most part, strongest further to the south, 35 to 40 knots there, down to around 15 to 25 knots as we get further off to the north and west. Along the Arctic coastline, for the most part, easterly flow, 10 to 15 knots, picking up as we get closer to the Kotzebue Sound area out of an easterly direction there, up to as high as 30 knots. And then on Friday, flow becoming easterly around the Beaufort Sea, 20 knots there, picking up and becoming northeasterly up to 25 knots, and then northerly up to around 30 knots as we get further towards the Bering Strait. A quick recap for the state: our big frontal system moving in throughout tonight, bringing a rain and snow mix throughout much of the Aleutian Islands, but starting to push that snow into places throughout the southwest part of the state, with a mixture of snow and fog throughout much of the interior and Brooks Range, some snow along the Arctic coastline. And then along the Gulf coastline, seeing a lot of rain continuing down into the southeast. But as we move into Friday, we will see that rain continuing in the southeast, but our frontal system really starting to push into the state now. This is where we're going to see a lot of our warning conditions, with the snow and blowing snow throughout much of the Yukon Delta, up into places of the southwestern Brooks Range, all throughout these areas in the Seward Peninsula, down around St. Lawrence Island, out into the Nulato Hills as well. So be wary of those conditions, and please check the website for additional details on any of those. As this progresses into further on Friday night, we're going to see those snow conditions spread out into the south central, so we're going to have some snow advisories out for many of those locations as well. Again, check our website for any additional details there. And a rain and snow mix behind this front out west. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX Brief for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Join Charlie Rose for provocative conversations with the top newsmakers.